Welkom bij Business Radio van op het FTI SuperNova event in de Waagnatie in Antwerpen. Ik ben Charlotte de Metsenare en ik praat zo dadelijk met de verantwoordelijke van 2000 uit de kluiten gewassen start-up federaties in Frankrijk. We gaan het hebben over de beperkingen van Europa op het moment dat AI wereldwijd aan het doorbreken is. We gaan het ook hebben over de uniciteit en de kracht van vrouwelijke investeerders. Ik kijk er alvast naar uit. Welcome Agatha Hidalgo, European Affairs Lead at France Digitale.
Thank you for having me.
How are you finding this event?
It's amazing. Everything is so smooth. The main stage is so wow. And there's a great vibe. I'm enjoying a lot.
Wonderful. I'm going to dive in straight ahead with my first question, which is, according to you, what are right now the main barriers preventing the EU from becoming a global leader in AI and big tech investments?
It's a super timely question. We just published a report on the generative AI supply chain, and our main finding is that we have very strong interdependencies from American and Chinese big companies, especially in the chips and infrastructure layers, including the cloud. So for us, the priority is not excluding those interdependencies, but minimizing them by investing heavily in European alternatives. We need to be able to de-risk the supply chain.
So can you maybe give me a specific example of which EU regulations have directly hindered AI innovation?
I think it's too early to say if we have hindered AI innovation. And in my experience, regulation never stops innovation, you know? If it was the case, we would have no health tech companies at all. It's one of the most heavily regulated sectors, yet is one of the most vibrant in tech. And I think the motto of SuperNova reminds that very well. Tomorrow is unstoppable. So innovation will happen, but regulation can, and indeed often does, slow it down and may even discourage some people from entering some sectors. This is why it's super important that associations like ourselves, France Digitale in France, startups at EU here in Belgium, Startup Coalition in the UK, and many others exist, because our job is to talk to policymakers, introduce them to entrepreneurs and investors, and make sure they don't do regulation that slows down their business. And if they really have to regulate, we want that regulation to be as simple as possible to execute for businesses. And another thing that we ask, and we've been advocating very heavily for in our manifesto for the European elections, is that wherever we do a law, we need to measure the impact that it will have on startups and investors, and not just on big companies. We need to always have in mind the startup size, innovation cycle, which is so fast, and needs.
Wonderful. I hear a quite positive mindset. You're basically saying that as long as we keep talking to regulations, as long as we keep measuring the impact, it's not hindering us right now. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any innovation.
Look, what we've seen is that innovation in AI is still happening a lot. The number of generative AI startups in France alone has boomed from last year to this one. It was 86 companies last year. It's 135 as of January this year. So innovation is still happening. Of course, businesses are not very happy with it, but we need to learn to live with it and avoid whenever we can, the extra red tape. But there is also a consensus that AI brings some fundamental questions about society, so entrepreneurs understand that there is a need to do something about it.
Absolutely. There's something happening. Everybody feels it. Some say that the EU has a quite conservative approach to investments. Would you agree with that statement?
When it comes to AI, I still feel like it's one of the most and top performing sectors, really. Companies in the AI space have had no trouble raising funds. Last year, 2023, AI startups in France raised 3.2 billion euros. And between last year and this year, Mistral alone, so our leading foundation model company in generative AI, they raised 385 million euros, which is massive. So the good companies are getting the money today.
Getting the funding.
Yes.
You sound super optimistic about the sector. That's amazing. I have questions regarding if you make a comparison with the US and China, where we can talk of a more single market. How do you compare us being the European market to them?
We're still very fragmented in the EU, and that's a problem. Because when we ask companies what's the second market they want to go to, it's often the US. they feel like the returns on their investment, because internationalization is an investment, they are higher in the US. So one thing we're advocating for is to really complete the single market. It's been around for decades, but there's so many aspects of business law, just very traditional business law, that are different. If you need to set up an entity in Belgium, it's not the same process as in France. And again, if I bring up the example of health tech, registering a medical device in Belgium, it's entirely different procedure. And in France, you guys also just changed the rules. So part of my job is really to give our members information on how to better expand to Belgium, to Germany, to the US tomorrow. But we really want the EU to be their go-to market and their market of choice. But it can only be when it's finally unique and harmonized.
Excuse my laughter. I was laughing because you said you guys, me and all of the Belgians out there. So I'm hearing, yes, Europe is doing fine, but we're still a bit behind when it comes to that single market.
100%.
So the idea that is right now out there is that the return on investment in the US is higher than in Europe.
I think it's somewhere between a perception and the reality. It really depends what your business is about, which sector you're in, what kind of strategy you put in place. But it's kind of the myth that it's out there, which pushes a lot of people. But it's still very expensive to go to the US, you know? You need to have the right connections. The legal framework, if different, it takes time. You usually need to have at least one of the founders of there, for example. So it's not easy. It's just that there's more capital in the market, so it's very attractive.
So would you say that this fragmentation of Europe means that we are missing out on tech opportunities?
I don't think so, because again, investment is there and good companies are there. So we're not missing out, but we may take longer to achieve our full potential. So this is what we should be worried about, given the very fast pace of technology development these days. Another thing that we should be looking at is investment moving onwards from the Series A from the early stages, because that's where the gap between Europe, the US, and Asia becomes deeper. If you look at like fundraising until 4 million euros, the size of VC allocation, Europe, Asia, and US are pretty comparable, where 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. You move on beyond those amounts, and Europe is below 20%. All the money is coming from other VCs. So that is probably something we should tackle.
So imagine that you are the decision maker of Europe. What's the first step or the first 2 steps that you think they should take?
100% harmonizing business regulation across Europe, making sure that once you launch a company, launch a product in the single market, once you get a certificate, for example, it's the same everywhere. And even for investor, that applies as well. You don't have to do the same procedures in Germany, the Netherlands, or France for due diligence, for registering an investment, for cashing out. We need that to be the same everywhere you do business in Europe.
All right. And how do you do that?
You go to Brussels and you get the European Commission involved and you have the Parliament work on it. And most importantly, you get stakeholders to the table. We need the startups, the investors to be part of the conversation. One thing that happens in Brussels is they always talk to the same kind of people, you know, the big companies, the established players. What France Digitale has been doing for the past 3-4 years in partnership with the associations in the other member states is to make startups and investors part of the conversation. And honestly, the feedback is quite positive. People are interested in what we have to say. So that's a great start. We need to go from awareness to action now. And with the European elections in June this year, we have an opportunity to change the narrative. There will be a new commission next year. The commission is the one that has the power to propose laws. We want them to shift the gears. For us, the priority for the next 5 years is not to be a regulatory superpower, but an innovation superpower.
Wow. So I'm hearing from you that what we want is to start listening to different people as startups and investors, bring them around the table as well and let their voice be out there. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely.
And that should mean a huge change for European regulation.
It should definitely be part of the equation. We need more capital going to these 2 categories which are still underserved. I mean, part of the risk aversion that we see in Europe also comes from traditional corporations that have slower processes that are not so much in tech, that were big in the industrial era. We need to take them to the digital era, to the AI era, to the tech era. And that is done not alone. It's done in partnership with startups and investors. So there's a lot that we can do there. But one thing that will for sure drive innovation and accelerate the pace of innovation in Europe is to have the big corporations from Europe, from the industrial age, getting involved and buying from startups. The best money for a company in the end, it's always the money from their clients.
Wonderful. You're talking of risk aversion. What would you say to the people out there who are still leaning towards aversion to this innovation story?
I would say you need diversification, and that is always true when you do investment. And part of your diversification strategy should include tech. I think the fact that the highest valued companies in the world today are tech companies is quite a testament to that. This is the economy of the future. And if you want to be meaningful in that economy and make the most returns, this is the right time, the early times of tech development when it's the right moment to invest.
Absolutely. If we're talking about this fragmentation within Europe, my question to you is, being responsible of 2,000 startups in France, imagine one of these startups wants to start getting involved with Belgium. Is this fragmentation a reason why they struggle doing that?
Yeah, definitely. It slows down the process. It means more costs for them. Basically, you need to do a market research for every new EU country you want to enter in. I have another example of many of our companies wanting to go to Italy, for example, and they need to access certain type of data, and they can't because even if there's a law at European level that says it should be the same everywhere, it's still not on the ground. So this is really making the process so much difficult, and it's taking them longer. They wait before going international, and if they do, they of course go for the biggest countries first. So I would say top destinations for expansion for French startups are still Germany, UK, and the US.
Even the UK? That surprises me a little bit.
The UK is still a thing, from what I hear, in our membership.
That example clearly shows how important it is to turn Europe into a single market. Thank you so much for this first half of the conversation, Agatha. We're going to take a quick break and then we're going to talk about something else. We gaan even ertussenuit. Ik praat nog steeds met Agatha Hidalgo, de European Affairs Lead bij France Digitale. We gaan zo meteen terugkomen en dan sturen we het gesprek richting Female Empowerment. Tot zo meteen.
Business Radio, live from FTI SuperNova. Life's a venture.
U luistert nog steeds naar Business Radio van op het FTI SuperNova Event in de Waagnatie in Antwerpen. Female Empowerment in de grote wereld van tech-startups. Laten ook vrouwelijke entrepreneurs zich gelden in innovatieve startups? Ik heb het maar te vragen aan Agatha Hidalgo, European Affairs Lead bij France Digitale. Agatha, you are the head of the largest startup and investor association in Europe, federating 2,000 startups, scale-ups, venture capital funds, business angles, incubators, accelerators. France Digitale has a unique overview with this of the European tech landscape. According to you, are there enough female entrepreneurs launching startups in the innovative tech sectors?
Clearly not. We recently published a report called Gender Gap in Entrepreneurship together with the diversity accelerator Willa. And the data that comes out of it is very telling. It's about the demographics of female entrepreneurs. So one thing that stands out, for example, is that for quite a few women, entrepreneurship is not their professional go-to choice. 28% of them, for example, go into entrepreneurship kind of for necessity after quitting a position or being laid off. Another interesting factor is that they are so much more senior than their male counterparts when they start a business. 44% of female entrepreneurs have over 10 years of professional experience before launching their own company. And on top of that, they also have less capital when they start over. 65% of female entrepreneurs have an annual revenue of around 60,000 euros against 45% of men. And on top of that, they are so much more demanding with themselves. According to our research, 77% of female entrepreneurs consider profitability their metric of success. It's not valuation, it's not marketing, it's really profitability. They are also much more mission-oriented. 56% of our respondents are into impact entrepreneurship, which is probably making things harder too for them. And maybe one last interesting data to share with you guys is that they're also fundraising much less than men. Only 17% of women are going to VCs against 40% of men. The gap is huge.
That's a huge list, Agatha. So what I'm hearing is, one, it's not their go-to choice. For me, that already is an interesting one. Why do you think is that?
It's probably cultural. It's a pattern that we may have inherited for generations. It's either driven by the sectors we work in. If you're interested in education, for example, entrepreneurship may not be your go-to choice, and same for health, which are sectors where, at least in Europe, it's not necessarily the case in other regions, there's a very heavy female presence. Another often pointed out reason is the lack of role models, but we think that is changing, and we have a number of initiatives on that front as well.
You seem like the perfect role model for many female entrepreneurs. For those of you who aren't watching, know that you can also watch us, and then you can see the beautiful Agatha nailing this interview. You're saying that women who do become an entrepreneur usually have more experience than men starting
That's
a
right.
company.
That's right. They usually do so after 10 years of professional experience in a company, which means they are also much more solid in what they're doing, and they're often deep experts in their sector.
So why is that? Why do you think they wait longer before they make the jump? Do they want to be more secure?
I think it's linked to some other of the data we discussed. Women, and I think we see this even in school, they tend to prepare better for everything they do. They know they must be the best to make it. They just can't be good if they want to stand out from the crowd. So I think they really prep this move. They don't improvise themselves as entrepreneurs. But one very cool thing that we're seeing a lot in Paris, in our ecosystem, for example, where most of our members are, we have them all across the country, but there's still a heavy concentration in the capital. Well, there's a lot of women becoming sole entrepreneurs these days, quitting very good jobs and saying, I'm going to launch my agency, I'm going to launch my advisory, my media, or my tech company if they have a very cool spin-out project from where they were working before.
You have seen so many pitches, seeing all these startups come to life. Do you see a difference between women who are pitching and men who bring a pitch?
I think the gap on the quality of pitching is closing, because the information on how to pitch right is more broadly available. And to be honest, the most impressive pitches I've ever seen were done by full female teams, because they were just so well prepped. They were amazing. They nailed it. So the gap there is closing. But again, go back to what we were saying before. Only 17% of women are actually pitching with investors. So that's the problem. There's not enough women there. And another problem is there's not enough women on the investor side either, especially in senior roles making the investment decisions. So one of the ways we are addressing this issue is with 100% female-to-female startup investor matchmaking, which we have been organizing for the past 2 years on March 8th, so symbolic date. And in the last edition that we held, together with other associations, again, Willa, Sista, Femtech France, and others, we had over 160 meetings, 60 startups, 25 investors, and even the Minister of Digitalization, Marina Ferrari, who's also a woman, who also worked in startups before, she was there, and I think this is sending a very strong message.
I think what you're also saying with your words and with your body language is, to all female entrepreneurs out there, dare to ask for funds, and dare to ask for mentorship.
Definitely. This is also something we're working on at our flagship event, FD Day, that will take place on September 18 in Paris. We will organize mentorship sessions with successful entrepreneurs from our board and network. And the ones that proposed this idea first were actually female entrepreneurs, because they know how important it is to show that success and have role models.
How important is it for you, as a European affairs lead, to adopt policies or quotas to increase female representation among investors and funded startups?
This is the other half of the problem for sure. We need policies to have more women in investment role. We partner up with European Women in VC, which is a community led by two great Polish investors. And with them, we did a pan-European report. And the results are pretty staggering. Only 2% of VC money is in the hands of women, and only 16% of general partners are women. So there's a huge gap there. Now, how do you solve this concretely? Well, there's a number of things that you can do. The first step is seeing diversity as a strategic asset and not an ESG obligation for your non-financial reporting. And there's a very profit-oriented business reason for this. Mixed teams perform better than full male teams. In our research, it actually stands out that mixed team with more women than men perform 9.3 percentage points better than teams with more men than women. And the returns are also less volatile when you have women in the team because, again, they take so much care of everything that they do, so the quality of their investment is so high. So first is really taking diversity seriously. It's in the best interest of your business. The second is having a diversity and inclusion policy in place, but take it seriously. It's not just empty words. You need to have KPIs that you track regularly to see progress year in year. And the third important step is probably also to, lead by example first with the team that you have in your own firm, but then also sharing the word both upstream and downstream. Today, most of LPs in Europe are still men. The wealthiest individual investing in tech, they're still men. We need more women there, and we have wonderful examples from very successful entrepreneurs in Germany, for instance, that are investing in VCs. And the same message needs to go downstream. Startup teams are still majorly male, and I think you just need to have a look around at any tech event and you'll see that dynamic. We need to send them the message. You're going to get the money, but if you really want to succeed, you need to have a diverse team with you carrying forward the business mission.
I'm hearing diversity should be seen as an asset and not a must-have. And when you have a diverse policy, you need to take it seriously and measure the effects of it.
Definitely. That's 100% it.
The non-believers or the disbelievers of quota say that if you put women up there just because of quota, they won't be taken seriously because they're only there because they had to be.
I think we've extensively proven that women are performing best. They are more expert. They perform better on cash dynamics, internal rate of return, volatility. There are a lot of very expert women out there. They just need to be given a chance. And then we can talk a lot about like all the hiring bias that you have, because maybe if you're a man, you tend to be closer to a male candidate. And even if you don't mean to be biased, you end up hiring a man just because you weren't thinking of it. So there's a lot of HR to be done there as well.
Can I ask you as a closing question, what are your predictions for the future?
As any VC, I will say I don't have a crystal ball, but I am very hopeful that things are changing. I see more and more women, both on the investor and entrepreneur side. I think there is a lot of momentum and interest. We have a lot of quality engineers. There's a lot of push to have more women in STEM education as well. And the fact that I am here today, I think it's quite telling that we can get there. I mean, there's more and more women, and you over here, our director general is also a woman. All of our senior leadership is female, and I think it's also part of the success of our association because we brought in that perspective. So I see the trend is upward, is slow, but it's upward, and we need to continue to support it. I think after COVID, we saw a fall in female employment, and I think that's a red sign, an alert sign that we should always be careful about. If there's ever any other crisis, we must not allow female presence in employment and in management positions go down. We need always to track the data and to keep pushing, but we can get there.
I love how data-driven you are, and your answers are. This is all science. So wonderful. Thank you so much for your testimonial, Agatha Hidalgo, European Affairs Lead at France Digitale.
Thank you for having me.
En ik dank ook onze luisteraars. Ciao, kus!